Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Holly Hughes, Chief Marketing Officer of BAI.
Good morning. Well, thank you so much for joining us for our final session of BAI Payments Connect. We really hope it's been a great 2.5 days for you. When we opened our session, we talked about our goal of providing you with a 360-degree view of this payments ecosystem, of talking about some really key issues across fraud, strategy, and operations that you can then take and go back and move your organization forward and really power some great decisions. So I hope we have accomplished that goal. At BAI, we talk about providing a number of things to you as financial services leaders. We talk about actionable insights, and I think there's been some really thought-provoking concepts that have been shared at the conference that you're walking away with. We also talk about powerful tools. You've had the opportunity to engage with each other, to engage with some solutions providers, and hopefully those tools will help you to also go back and ultimately make your job a little bit easier, we're hoping. This is definitely a challenging space. And then certainly meaningful connections. It's always great at our conferences to see how people reconnect. Some of you have been coming to BAI Payments Connect for quite a while. And then also people, if it's your first time here and you're meeting new colleagues, similar leaders who are faced with common challenges. I think that's such a great opportunity for you when you come to our conference. So again, thank you for taking your time to be with us here in beautiful San Diego. And thank God we got some of that great weather, especially if you're from the Midwest or a less than sunny climate. That's been a real treat. So I hope you've enjoyed that as well. Our featured session is all about innovation, which I think is such a great topic for us to explore. And we've got a wonderful person to kind of lead us on this journey. John Thomas is currently the Executive Vice President of Payments at TD Bank. And John also has a really interesting background. He was in financial services, took some time out, and was actually at Amazon. So he's done a number of really interesting roles there that I think will be very helpful to our discussion today, and then is now leading payments, as I mentioned, for TD Bank. So John is here to really inspire us, to challenge us in the area of innovation. As you're listening to John's presentation, if you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the mobile app. I'll be coming back out at the conclusion of the presentation and leading some of that Q&A with John. So now if you could please join me in welcoming our featured speaker for our final session, John Thomas.
Thank you. So good morning. We made it. Thank you to all of you who have resisted the sunshine, seafood, and surf to still be here. So we've heard a lot of interesting things over the last couple of days. What I'm going to try to do this morning is just maybe talk a little bit about now what? As we all head back to the airport, head back to our cars, what are we going to do next? So I've got some good news. I have been an entrepreneur and an innovator in several different service verticals. I've done it in media and marketing services and e-commerce and digital, and of course in financial services. And one of the things that I've come to learn is there's some irrefutable laws of innovation. As a matter of fact, there's a mathematical formula that you can put together to drive your innovation. So are you ready? I'm kidding, okay? There's no mathematical formula to do this at all. So what I'm going to suggest we do is sort of put the notebooks aside, and we're just going to have a chat about innovation, maybe in a very, very different way than has happened in the past. So over the last few days, we've heard a lot of different topics, okay, about what, everything from biometrics to wearables, and the list goes on and on and on and on, right? And the temptation I think all of us have as bankers is to grab that one or maybe two things, bring them back to our offices and say, I've got to start driving some innovation around this idea or around that idea, or I need an innovation lab at our bank, or I need I need an investment fund. I need to start investing in fintechs. Like how often do you hear that, right, in the banks? Let's think about something a little bit different as we plot out our innovation paths. I want to talk about astronomy for a second. Does anybody know what's different about the North Star from all the other stars in the sky? It's not the brightest. It's not the biggest. It's fixed. It doesn't move, right? So from our vantage point on Earth, the North Star does not move. It stays in the same place all the time, right? So for hundreds of years, explorers, used the North Star to figure out where they were going, right? And much like them, I would say in banking, especially in the area of payments and banking, we've got all these alternative paths in front of us as well, right? Where do I go next? Like, where's point A? Where's point B? Where's point C? And what I'm going to suggest we do as an industry is not try to figure out point A and point B and point C. Let's actually figure out point Z, right? And that's your destination, right? That's where you're trying to get. It's your North Star, right, as a company. And one of the things, if you look at really successful innovators in any service industry, any disruptor, right, or a really good business incubator, they have this sort of North Star concept in common. I'll give you a practical example from my career. So a couple of companies ago, I was running the digital businesses inside of an international media and marketing services company. So I had a website manufacturing business, I had a Google AdWords business, digital video, digital display advertising businesses. And we were going through a large corporate turnaround around the world. We operated in 6 countries on 3 different continents. And we had been a print marketing company for most of our heritage. And I was running the business incubation team at this company. And I did not lack for resources or funding. There was a lot of acceptance inside of that company to try a lot of things. So I came in sort of in the middle of this turnaround. And when I say we were experimenting and launching products, I mean, it was unbelievable. Like, we literally had 12.5 innovation initiatives underway, fully funded inside of the company. But we had absolutely no North Star. We had this big physical sales force out in the field. Sound familiar, right? We all have branches. We had a big telemarketing function. Sound familiar? Yeah, most of us have that. And we were innovating like there was no tomorrow, and we just kept creating this portfolio of things. But it wasn't aimed at anything. And I inherited that portfolio, starting up new business lines. And we took a step back and said, well, what is it exactly we're trying to be? This was a print advertising company trying to become a digital media and marketing services company. And I had a payments business I was starting up, a loyalty business, an affinity business. I had a tablet hardware business. I had a software business that had to do with sort of competitive intel. And the idea was, well, we could sell all this. We serve small businesses around the world. That's what that company did. And we took 30 days, and we figured out what our North Star was. And our North Star was really simple. We help small businesses around the world get found online and look great when they're found. That was it. And once we agreed to that, we took a look at everything else we were doing in the innovation cycle, and what do you think we did with it? We killed it. Yeah, we killed it. We were deploying tens of millions and actually over $100 million of capital into these innovation things, but we didn't have a North Star yet. And each one of them discretely made some sense, but they weren't going to add up to anything that was going to be cohesive at the end of the journey. That's what a North Star is really about. So let's think about what's happening in our business right now, right? Clearly, as I came back into the industry a couple of months ago, having been gone for about a half a decade, I was amazed at how many dollars had been expended, like shocking amounts of capital deployed here. And it's not just us and the banks, right? The payment networks have done it. The fintech companies have done it. The telcos did it. The retailers have done it. The digital giants have done it, all in this payment space. But I think the thing that's interesting to look at is sort of after a half a decade, it's been a little more, it's probably been 3/4 of a decade, right? This trend has been going on. As the tide sort of rolled out and we looked at where we were, I would argue there was no sea change, right, yet. We're not, we haven't seen it yet. And I'm not preaching complacency by any stretch of the imagination. But what I did see coming back in was in our zeal as an industry and as individual players to chase the shiny object, or in our fear of being left behind in the innovation space, we had done some really kind of dumb things in hindsight as an industry and spent an awful lot of money on things at the end of the day really didn't move the needle. So I guess the good news is nobody's won this game yet, right? So we're all looking at fintech and the big digital players and some of the things going on around us. We feel like we're under attack as an industry. I mentioned, billions have been spent on technology, but very, very few players have actually scaled. Like, think about it for a minute. Think about over the last decade in payments, what are the things that really scaled? PayPal, right, continues to. More recently, you probably make an argument that Venmo, right, fits into that. Square, that scaled pretty quickly. And you can look at those companies, you can question their business model. We'll talk about that in a second. But it's a short list. Like, maybe you can add one or two others. You don't need a second hand to really count the things in payments that have scaled over the last 3/4 of a decade. But we spent billions of dollars. And the private equity firms have spent tens of billions of dollars. And I think one of the good messages that we need to take away is dollars don't equal success in the payment space. Like, just because you've got a massive fund, that doesn't mean you're going to move the needle at all. As a matter of fact, I would make the argument that you can innovate in this space with actually very, very few dollars. And we'll talk about that a little bit this morning. But first, let's take a look for a minute at what these disruptors are actually doing. I'm talking about the big names, right? I'm not talking about the little fintech startups, and there's a lot of them out there, right? And we all have to keep our eyes on them. But, the Amazons, the Apples, the entities like that, what are they doing? So I mentioned I left banking, and I spent a half a decade in the digital world. I want to describe the digital business model a little bit. So in the digital world, you start your business model construction with solving a problem, right? You identify a problem, and then you figure out the technology you're going to use and deploy to solve that problem. And then you deploy the technology, and you build a user base, right? And then you monetize the user base. That's the digital business model. Now let's talk about our business model for a minute in banking. Think about how we do things. What do? We come up with a product idea, right? We come up with a pricing mechanism and costs for those products, and we calculate a product margin. Then we go figure out what all the systems and marketing and process and operational requirements are, and we build out all that stuff. And now we've built we do research maybe to validate our hypothesis. And then we turn to our sales and marketing folks and go, okay, I built it. Now, will you please go segment the market and tell me who you're going to sell this thing to? Because I know I make this much margin on every unit. So go get me a whole bunch of units. So product margin, build the thing, segment, sell it, and market it. That's the bank business model. Digital business model, solve a problem, deploy technology, build a user base, monetize the user base. Those companies are fundamentally architected in their model, and I don't mean just their technology architecture, because when we say architecture as bankers, we all go to technology. Their business architecture, their processes, their decision-making processes are fundamentally constructed to fail fast and move on. They actually manufacture their company for iteration, but that's not the bank business model. It's not what we do. So as we look into Silicon Valley and we think about the things that are happening there, and this slide's labeled creative disruption. Creative disruption's easy. Let's talk about scaled disruption. Scaled disruption is hard. Let's go back to those few examples. PayPal, Square, Venmo, you can pick your own. What do they have in common? They remove friction from a process, point one. Number two, they started at the bottom of the market and they worked up. How many, I've heard it once or twice, how many of you have heard about sort of underbanked in the last 2.5 days, right? I want to plant a concept in your head that's important as you think about how to innovate across segments. Underbanked in the US is not underbanked, it's overbanked. It's over-solutioned, right? So what do we do as bankers? When we build things, we build more. More is better, right? We just keep building things. But you look at the disruptors that have scaled, they came in at the bottom of the market in what we called sort of underserved. They understand, no, the banking community was over-serving them. Like our solutions were too expensive and too complex, right? Merchant accounts with terminals in a small business at a craft fair, like that's over-solutioned. Like let's put a dongle in a phone. Let's make it really that simple. And when they do these things, so some of these examples, like a PayPal clearly monetizes transactions. But a lot of these digital disruptors, they're not going to monetize transactions. And we look at that. And I remember when I first came back into the industry a couple of months back, even inside of our organization, I heard a lot of dialogue around this. Well, their business model is going to fall apart because they're giving it away for free. Well, let me let you in on something. Those digital business models are as sound, if not more sound, than our business models. Let me tell you why. In the digital world, if you're removing friction, deploying technology, building a user base, and monetizing the user base, you're essentially a marketplace company, right? Apple is a hardware and marketplace company. Amazon, clearly a marketplace company. Google is a marketplace company. They created a market in something that didn't exist called AdWords, right? They're a market maker. And when you're operating in that business model, you're operating somewhere in the 3,000 basis point range, right? The App Store gets monetized at 30% of revenue. The sweet spot of the Amazon marketplace is in that range. It's 15 to 45%. The sweet spot's 30%. So you're operating on 3,000 basis points, right, in these transactions. If you're just an ad placer, right, you just have sort of an ad placement marketplace, you're probably operating between 500 and 1,000 basis points in your business of transaction value. Do you really think these companies care about a handful of basis points on a move money transaction? They don't. And it's really sound economics for them not to care about it. David Marcus, right, former PayPal CEO, now running Facebook Messenger, and I'm not going to quote him, but I'll give sort of thematically what he said about Facebook. He was interviewed a couple of months ago, and he came out and said, we'll never monetize a transaction at Facebook. And the media followed up, and they're like, well, why not? There's money in payments. And his answer was something to the effect of, I'm an advertising company. Why would I bother monetizing a payment transaction? Like really, 50 basis points on a payment transaction? I get 3,000 basis points in what I do. We need to understand that. They're not playing the same game It's not about regulation, guys. It's not about them not playing by the same rules that we play by, which, by the way, is unfair. They should play by the same rules. But they're playing a different game, right? They're after ad marketplace revenue, which is multiples and multiples and multiples transactionally of anything that any of us do in the room. And it's really, really important for us to understand as we think about our innovation practices. Now, sort of set up, lots of money coming into the industry, not that much accomplished yet. It's a scary space. We've got competitors from outside of our industry that are playing for something really, really different than we are, and their economic model makes a great deal of sense. And they're playing a different game. So I just want to pause for a minute and think about that. They're playing a different game. What do we do in banking, in technology? We have a habit, and I have been at the head of this pack at times in my career, of chasing shiny objects, right? And when we've talked about them in the last 2.5 days, biometric, wearables, blockchain, faster payments, real-time payments, yada, yada, and it goes on, right? And it's a slightly different list as I come back into the industry than it was a half a decade ago, but it's really not that different. But the motion's exactly the same. We're all chasing sort of these shiny objects. And I think as you go back and you think about your innovation strategy, the challenge I want to hand to you is, do you really think the latest technology, the latest thing, whether it's blockchain or faster pay, do you really think that's the building block of an innovation strategy? Or is it just sort of this month's, this quarter's, this year's thing to form a viewpoint about, but it's not actually part of my innovation strategy? My innovation strategy is setting after answering much more fundamental questions for my customer and society. So we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about sort of innovation modalities and plans and how you actually set it up in a bank. But I think the very, very first thing we've got to do is ask ourselves, why does my company need to innovate? And that sounds like such a silly question, but I bet most of our companies have not actually intelligently answered that question. And by the way, the answer of because everybody else is, that's not an answer. That is not a reason to innovate, okay? But I said, our industry's sort of been plagued by that. Well, look over there, they're doing it, I have to do it now. And we have these little product and capability checklists that we've got to go down. I got this, I got that, and that really hasn't gotten us anywhere yet, has it? So why do we have to innovate? What do we want to achieve when we innovate, and then how are we going to do it? If you don't go through a specific thought process around these three things, you're going to be left with what most people in the industry are left with. You're going to go back to your bank, and you're going to get stuck selling individual ideas and individual project initiatives. And let me ask you, show of hands, how many people think that path is bearing good fruit for you? Yeah, it's hard. Like, if you have to go back and sell innovation on the merits of a given initiative, you have a really, really tough road ahead of you. So let's start with the why. Always start with the why. What purpose does your innovation strategy serve? The first thing I'm going to suggest you all do is take a look in the mirror and ask yourself and your company some very provocative and tough questions. And these questions are designed to get at the bottom of your why. Why am I innovating? Why am I innovating? Why am I trying to go there? And the answers to these questions are going to become your North Star, okay? So I guess the question is, what questions do you ask? Well, here's a list of questions that you may want to ask yourself in the payment space. And I want you to think of these as A-B choices as you go down through the list. So think about a scale of 4, where 1 is, I want to do the first thing. 4 is, I want to do the second thing in the question. And two and three is 2 is I lean to the first thing, 3 is I lean to the second thing. And go through an exercise inside of your company where you go down through this list and you answer these questions. And by the way, if you get to the end of this exercise and you have 2 or all 2s and 3s, go back, because you didn't make decisions. Go back. At minimum, half of your answers need to be a 1 or a 4 through this exercise. And this exercise is specific to your company. There's no right or wrong answers in this exercise. But I've used this process in 3 different service verticals at 3 big international companies, and it does work. So let's take a look at the questions real quickly. In payments, are you playing offense or defense? You can't play both. Two-way players don't exist in the NFL anymore, okay? Pick one. Pick one. Are you attacking or are you defending? Are you investing now or for the future? Has a huge implication how you fund your innovation. Don't say both. Pick one, okay? Are you building a product or a capability? This is really, really important in technology-driven service verticals, which we increasingly are. Am I building a set of products, or am I building a capability set that I'm going to deliver there? Are you acquiring and deepening relationships? Is your payment strategy about more units? Or is your payment strategy about defending the transaction flows and associated revenue? Pick one. Do you want to run a payments P&L, or do you want to build option value and flexibility in your company? It's really hard to do both. I've run big P&Ls, I've run incubators. You know, when you're running big P&Ls, you know, you're about next quarter's numbers. When you're running incubators, you're looking at the horizon. It's really, really hard to do both at the same time. Should you own the experience or own the transaction? This is a really hard one in payments. Should we be the contextual front end and initiation context of transactions? Or do we just need to own the transaction at the end of the day? This is going to point you in a specific direction based on how you answer that. Do we want to win as a company or win as an industry? This is interesting, coming back into banking after being going on. Top end of the market, the big guys clearly trying to win as companies. But if you're not in the top end, give some hard thought to maybe my strategy needs to be about winning as an industry. You got to decide who your enemy is, right? Are you innovating from the top or the bottom? I talked earlier about, you know, the scaling payments disruptors. They're innovating from the bottom. They move up. Look at what PayPal did. I mean, they started way at the bottom of the market, but they've moved up. You got to decide. It's hard, by the way, to innovate from the top. But what do we do as banks? We look at our most profitable, mass affluent customers, and we try to innovate from the top, right? And then are you monetizing transactions or users? Right? Remember what those digital players are solving for. They're not going to monetize transactions. They're going to monetize the user base. But you got to decide inside of your company which of those two things you're going to do, and it'll point you in a direction. So you may go through this, and you know, this company here may say, we're going to do some defensive plays. We're trying to retain our current flows. We think it's a product-centric strategy is really what we're trying to build. We're going to hammer on the payments P&Ls because we're defending those current flows. You know, we're a mid-sized player, so we really think we need the industry to win, and then we'll deploy strategies to get our fair share. And we're going to keep monetizing transactions. That's fine. That's a fine strategy. But just make those decisions. Don't go home and go, I need to set up a payments innovation lab. Answer these questions first. When you get to the end of that list of questions, you've actually defined your North Star. And it doesn't move. Like, that's where I'm trying to get, right? I'm gonna defend my existing portfolio, or I'm gonna be an attack player, right, who's going to go harvest a whole bunch of new relationships. I'm going to do it through a capability set that doesn't exist. You know, whatever it is, choose it. Now, we got to go to the next step, right, which is the what. But there's one really, really important thing to do before you move to the what step. So you've gone through your list of questions. You got your sort of North Star, like that's where we're headed, right? What do you think you need to do first? Make sure it's everybody's North Star inside of your company, okay? We don't get to have personal North Stars, all right? Go socialize it. And one of the things I have found at multiple companies in multiple industries, it's surprisingly interesting how easy that is to do. And what you do is come up with your list of questions, take my questions, I don't care, come up with your own list, walk into the top 10 or 15 execs in your company and sit down with them one-on-one and ask them those questions. Spend some time with them and go through, and they will really appreciate the exercise because they're not softball questions. They're strategic questions. Get that feedback and then pull them all together and say, you know what, folks, generally, this is where it came out. You know, you draw your little snake in the A-B questions, and you say, it seems like what our company is saying is we want to go here, right? This is our destination. And then when you get those top executives to say yes or tweak it, that's a huge, huge accomplishment for you. Before you start talking about labs and investment funds, go through that exercise. So now let's move to step 2. We know we're directionally headed now. Now we got to figure out what to do, right? So there's point Z. What are points A, B, and C on this journey? So before you decide that, I'm going to ask you to step back and reflect on something else. I want you to ask another question. And the question is, what's my approach to define my what? And that sounds like a really odd question, but let me explain what it's about. In some companies, you can take your innovation direction from the top. It's what I call VOE, voice of executive, okay? And the good news is this methodology gets you buy-in, right? You have sponsorship from day one, right? If your sort of what definition approach is voice of executive. The bad news is it requires an extremely visionary leader or set of leaders, right? So Apple could do this when Steve Jobs was here, right? That was a voice of executive company in a lot of ways, but it doesn't work for all of us. The second approach is VOC, voice of customer, right? And this is a methodology I'm guessing most of us in the room are pretty comfortable with. And what this, this is traditional qualitative and quantitative research to figure out what is it I got to do? And the good news in this approach is it does gauge existing market demand. But the challenge in this approach is it's probably not going to identify emerging and future trends. It's hard to research what's next through traditional VOC methodologies. So the third methodology is design thinking, and I'm not going to go into what design thinking is. If you're not familiar with it, it's a very specific approach. It was developed at Stanford. A lot of digital companies use this. Go research it online. But design thinking is a research process that seeks to solve a human problem. And it's a human need. It's not even necessarily a customer need, and there's an important differentiation there. And there's a specific 5-step process that design thinking brings you through to sort of solve a human need. Again, digital and disruptive companies tend to use this. It doesn't mean it's right for your organization, doesn't mean it's right for my organization, because this methodology requires organizational belief. You can't go develop an innovation practice at your company and say, I'm going to use the design thinking methodology if everybody in your company thinks it's voodoo. Like, it's not going to work. But make a decision across one of these 3, right? So, place a bet on one of these methodologies as your primary. Voice of executive, voice of customer, or design thinking and iterative processes, okay? But then ask yourself, once you make that decision, you don't have to go all in on one, but you should definitely have a primary motion to define your what. Ask yourself this question at the end of that. Am I using research to validate my hypothesis or form my hypothesis? It's a really important question. And I'll be honest, I ran a lot of prod dev labs and R&D labs in banking and sort of banking career one. And I'll admit on stage that, and I had a vertically integrated, I had product and technology and marketing and research all wrapped up into one group. So I had my own captive in-house research capability, and I was using it to validate the hypothesis. And by the way, through qualitative research, I got to the point where I could pretty much prove the sky is green, even though it's not. And I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just saying, like, be intellectually honest with yourself at this point in the process. Am I trying to prove that the VOE thing is right and it's okay to go down that path? Or am I using design thinking to form my hypothesis in the first place and have the customer sort of bring me down a path? So let's pause again. We've gone through the A-B questions. We've defined our North Star. We've picked a methodology to define the what we're going to build. VOE, VOC, design thinking. Okay? That what could be a service play, it could be a product play, it could be an experiential play. Your research methodology would drive you there. Take a little bit of a temperature check at this point. Am I being bold enough in my approach? But am I being pragmatic? If you're all bold, you're not going to get anywhere. If you're all pragmatic, you're not going to see more than 3 feet in front of your nose. So get that balance. Have you asked yourself the right questions at this point? And if so, now it's go time, right? It's the fun part, implementation, which is the part I love. I'm hoping you guys do too. We've got our why, we've got our what. Next series of questions to ask yourself. In any service vertical, doesn't matter if it's financial, doesn't matter what the service vertical is. When you're going through a chaotic period, and I think we'd all agree, we're going through a chaotic period right now, right? Aren't we in our vertical? There's sort of 4 basic strategy vectors you can put yourself on. Predict, experiment, follow, and options. Those are the 4, okay? And they're sort of listed here, right? You can predict the future. You can say, my strategy is I'm going to build the best crystal ball in the industry, and I'm going to out-predict my competition. And some companies can do that. The second strategy is, I don't think I can do that, so I'm going to experiment. I'm going to throw a whole bunch of stuff up on the wall, and I'm going to see what sticks. And I'll build a fail fast, fail big, move on sort of motion inside of my company. And that strategy can work. The third strategy is, for whatever reason you think you can't do either of those two, be a fast follower. And there's really successful companies out there that are fast followers. It's an incredibly capital efficient innovation strategy, right? Fail on somebody else's dime, and then architect your way in a way that you can move quickly once it's apparent what a winning solution is. And then the fourth strategy is, no, I'm going to re-architect my business. I'm going to build optionality and flexibility, not just in technology, but in everything else that we do, right? So predict, experiment, follow, or build flexibility, okay? Top banks, like the really big dogs out there, right? They tend to sort of fall in those first two, right? They're going to predict, they're going to do big proprietary payment plays, and they're going to predict the future and force it. Or some of them have set up some really well-funded innovation labs, and they're going to experiment till the cows come home, and something's going to stick, and that's fine. If you're in the middle of the market, you're probably taking a look at one of those other two things. And by the way, when you get down to that fourth option, this idea of building flexibility and optionality, if you're a small bank in the audience, you might actually be better positioned to do that than the big banks. You're probably running your business on somebody else's technology, who's a shared service, a SaaS provider essentially. And there's an interesting dynamic as I look at our industry in 2016 versus maybe 2010. I'm actually seeing some of the small players being more nimble in this business than the big players because they don't own their own technology. So think about that a little bit. Next thing. You gotta work through a list of questions here on your what. So we did our why, we did our what, right? We think our how is going to be one of these. We're going to predict, we're going to experiment, we're going to follow, or we're going to just build optionality. Look at this is the checkpoint time where you look at your innovation strategy and go, okay, what is the central thesis of where I'm trying to go? You know, did my A/B questions tell me, and then my what research tell me I'm doing a series of product plays? If so, build a product development lab. Is your thesis and research saying, no, it's all about the UX and the experience, and that's how I think I'm going to win? Then go build a design center of excellence, okay? If it's really about capability and you think it's about infrastructure and architecture and that's how you want to play, then your org model is going to be very tech and development heavy for some period of time on this journey. If you're going to do attack plays, like if you went through those ABs and you said, yeah, I'm gonna go where nobody has gone before, like that's my innovation strategy, then you probably need to build a business incubator, right? That's going to stand up new service businesses. And if you're going to make a lot of small bets, if you're going to be that experimentation company, if that's where your thesis landed you, and these are all valid, these all work, then you need a rapid deployment lab, not the big scaled prod dev lab. You need a rapid deployment lab. Now, it never ceases to amaze me. Really big, really smart companies get these things confused. Actual conversation I had 2 weeks ago with a colleague in the industry. Sitting down, we're chatting, having coffee, we're talking about where do we go as an industry? How do we fight off, these sort of attackers at the gates? And he said, we really think it's all about the experience. At our company, we're really going to double down on UX, right? And we think that's the way to win. And we think the disruptors that are scaling, they're winning on UX plays. And I was like, it's probably a pretty good thesis. So what are you doing about it? His answer, we're building a product development lab. Product development labs don't build UX. They build products, right? Design centers build UX, right? So this is the point in the process where your how decisions in innovation need to look at, am I going to be a predictor, am I going to be a follower, am I going to be an innovator? And then you got to go back and look at your North Star, and you got to go back and look at your what, and say, is it a product play, is it a UX play, is it what is it? Not the specifics, but the general direction. Then your org model in your innovation center needs to meet that. That's why I say, don't go home and say, I need to start up an innovation lab. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe you need to build a design center. Maybe you need to go hire some really great software architects. It depends, right? But you got to go through this process. All right, we've defined our North Star. We've defined our approach around research to define our what. We've defined our what in this process. We've picked an innovation motion, predict or follow. We have picked an organizational model. We're going to do a product lab, we're going to do a design center, we're going to do an infrastructure group. Now you got to fund it, right? This is kind of the hard part. You got to pick a funding model for your innovation practice. And this is very company specific. I have used all 5 of these at different companies, and they all work. They all work. You can do a project ROI-based model where you're funding innovation on the margin. You can do a product P&L model where you're building products and margins, and you have a good economic thesis to what product you're trying to innovate around. You can do the longer-term infrastructure sell, a little bit harder. You got to do it at the top of the house, but it absolutely works. If your thesis, if your innovation thesis and your North Star goes something like, we're going to defend existing customers and our existing flows. We believe we're going to monetize our user base through our checking business. We're not overly concerned about monetizing individual payment transactions. Then partner and revenue share models might be a really, really valid way for you to fund your innovation. If you're going to monetize that user base, in the checking product, for example, then don't get overly hung up on your revenue margins on ancillary services to protect checking. Or you can attach the top of the house initiatives. Like you've got it. You've got your organization saying that's where we want to go, and we know we got a research methodology, and it's telling this is what we need to do, and we got the right organizational model. We just can't find the money. Go find the top 15 projects in your C-suite, and find the one that directionally moves you where you need to go. I will tell you right now at TD, I'm using methodology 5. I'm using one of the other ones too, but this really, really works. Become a go-fast proof point in a longer-term 3 to 5 year project. It's a great way to fund innovation inside of a bank. You don't have to stick your hand out and say, give me money. Now, we've gone through all the steps. Why, or what motion, or what. We've defined an innovation approach. We've defined an organizational model. We've picked a funding model. A little bit of caution. I'm not here to throw stones in any company, but think about companies like MySpace, Blockbuster, Borders, BlackBerry, Research in Motion. What do all these companies have in common? They've fallen on really tough times, haven't they? But you know what? They were all disruptors. Every single one of those companies was the innovator. So what happened? Like, they got this right. They built the innovation practice. They had a thesis. They proved it. They changed an industry, and then it got changed again. And we can debate what happened, right? Maybe they fell behind in technology. Maybe their product and their pricing mechanisms. Maybe their value prop got a little wonky. But if you think about those companies, most of them actually lost sight of their North Star, or they didn't have it defined in the first place. Blockbuster thought they were a chain of movie rental stores. What they actually should have been was, we're the company that makes getting media content easier. And if they had picked that as a North Star and not defined themselves as a rental chain, I suspect Blockbuster would have kept innovating. They would have come up with Netflix, and then they would have come up with something streaming, post Netflix, and So your North Star, don't lose sight of it. It doesn't change. You don't redefine your North Star in a company every quarter or every year. You don't. It doesn't move. We're going to be the company that helps small businesses get found online, and we're going to make them look really great when they're found. That's good. That doesn't change. It stays that way for 5 years. Everything about your innovation practice should center on it. So maybe those companies have told us something. Maybe this North Star thing's kind of important. Maybe chasing shiny objects can get yourself in a lot of trouble. Maybe a North Star can define everything else in your innovation practice. Your what motion, your how motion, your organizational model, your funding model. North Stars eliminate roadblocks and obstacles inside of companies, because as I said, I've been an entrepreneur for the last 10 or 15 years inside of really big matrix companies. It's not always easy to drive innovation thesis inside of companies like that, but we've been very, very successful, my teams have, by using some of these approaches. If you do it, my argument to you guys when you go back is, if you get a little bit of hard work and some good luck, everybody in this room can win, okay? So that's the end of the presentation. We'll take, Holly's gonna come up. I think we're gonna take a couple of quick questions, and then we're gonna get you off to, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I think when we talk about powerful tools, what a great blueprint that you've laid out for everyone in terms of innovation, so thank you so much. If you do have questions, go ahead and enter those in the mobile app. We do have time to roll through a number of them. So some questions are coming in, I think, a little bit more specifically to payments. So John, what do you think the future is for payments in banking?
I have no idea. And I hate to say that. So my innovation thesis is not predict the future, obviously. I mean, I don't believe I have the best crystal ball in this business. I do think it's really important to understand the motivation of the disruptors, because I think those are the forces that ultimately, end of the day, will drive the future of payments. So as we understand what some of these marketplace companies are doing, what some of the digital companies are doing, you can usually sort of predict where they're going to go. You can predict the impact on our current revenue models when you understand those types of plays. I think there's an interesting thing happening though in payments, and it's going to be interesting to watch how this plays out over the next couple of years. The disruptors are disrupting on specific use cases. We as banks serve a broad host of needs to our customers, but the disruptors are trying to pick us off use case by use case. Now, the really good disruptors, I don't think will stay there in the future. I think the really good disruptors will do things like PayPal and what Square did, is they'll start in a sliver of the market, and they'll move up, but they'll also add services. But their point of entry is almost always a single use case. And so I think the interesting thing in the future, Holly, is to see, do the disruptors do more what we do in banks, where they start solving for multiple use cases? If they do that, and they do that effectively, I think we've got our work cut out for us in the industry.
Great. So building off of that a little bit, what do you think is the big idea that hasn't been implemented? Do you think there's something kind of hovering out there?
Yeah, I do. Simplicity. I think that's the big idea. I don't think it's any more complicated than I was telling a story recently. I went out to a bank site, I'll tell you which one, and I moved money to my daughter in college in online banking. On screen number 12, no lie, on screen number 12, I got the message, your transaction's complete. I send money to my daughters through Venmo as well. It takes me a forefinger and 2 to 3 clicks. Venmo processed $1 billion of transaction volume in January. And they were hardly even there 2.5 years ago. They have no ad budget, no marketing budget. How did they do it? Simplicity. And we just keep layering complexity in everything we do in banks. I think that's the big idea.
Great. And then a question in terms of, you may mentioned some of the disruptors that have, emerged and been able to stay. So people like PayPal, Venmo, and Square. Any advice for banks in terms of competing head-to-head against those specific disruptors?
Yeah, I think the first thing you got to do is understand why they're winning. There's people in the audience, whether you want to admit it or not, that use PayPal, that use Venmo. I admit it. I told our CEO. I showed her my phone. The TD app was right next to the Venmo app. Maybe you or a spouse or a family member's got a very small business and you're using Square. Like the reason people use them is because they're really, really easy to use. They're just easy, right? And you're seeing an interesting thing happening in the population. Human beings are starting to trade ease and security a little bit. And it's not particularly good news for us as banks, right? So as we think about competing with those entities, I don't think there's any reason all of us in this room can't make things easier. That makes it a lot harder on those disruptors to come in and win. They can't beat us on trust and security. They can't beat us in multiple services in one place, not yet anyway, but they're beating our heads in on ease and simplicity. So I think if we just focus on that for the next couple of years, we got a shot at beating them.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you again. I think you have really sent us off, I think, with some inspiring thoughts and ideas to go back to our organizations. Again, on behalf of BAI, I just want to thank you so much for coming to the conference. I do really appreciate this time away from the office and do hope you go back energized to move your organization forward. I was also taking some notes back there as CMO, so thank you very much, John. And we really value the voice of the customer at BAI, and we're looking at innovating as well. So how can we really help you in your individual roles and also the industry overall? So you will be receiving some surveys. If you have other ideas, the app is a great place. You can find me on LinkedIn, shoot me an email, come find me after the conference. If there's anything that BAI can do to further help you on this payments journey, we are here and really want to be a valuable partner to you. So thanks again, safe travels, and we really appreciate your time with us.
Thank you.
Awesome, it was great. Thank you so much.